So
yours?
I've been doing it for about, I don't know, about 3 or 4 years. And I recently took a little jaunt into modern calligraphy. And so now I find that I'm going below the baseline and I'm doing all sorts of things with my letters. And so I wanted to come back and do this and refresh like the rules again. So it's been great.
Oh, okay. So how do you like the modern? Like when you were like veering from the traditional, did you feel like you were losing the sense of like the structure of the letters?
Yeah. And so that's why it's been really good to come back and just start all over and say, oh, that's right. Because modern has so much, like I said, below the baseline, and
Mhm.
you're jumping and stuff like that. And so to come back to like getting the foundations again has been really helpful.
Thanks for sharing. Okay, Anna Marie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I've taken a couple courses with Young High, and so grateful to have you, Young High. You're amazing and so inspiring and encouraging. And anyway, I just absolutely love calligraphy. I wish though that I could, like, it hasn't come easy. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
But it's coming, and I appreciate your patience and your critiques and your advice. And thank you for helping me on my journey.
Oh, you're welcome. Let's see. Kathy. Oh, you have to mute yourself. It's usually like in the audio button on the bottom left. Bottom left of your window, there's a little microphone. And if you just click on that, I think you can unmute yourself. Oh, you know what? Maybe I can do it for you. Let's see. Oh, okay. Um, that's okay. If we're having technical issues, maybe by the end of the session. Okay. Um, so for those of you, I think we're ready to begin. Kathy, let me know. Maybe at the end of the session, you can say hello again. Okay, so let me pin my window. So for those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome to the course live session. So you guys are all should be on module 5. 5 would be connecting the lowercase letters. And so I hope the pace of the course has been good for you guys. It's a 9-week course. So the reason why I drip out the lessons for new students is because there is a tendency to want to rush through or like jump ahead to other modules. And so that's why for incoming new students, we do drip it out and then it remains open for you guys to access it at any time. So there were some questions about students who was wondering, what can I still log in and look at the lessons after our course technically ends? And so yes, you can. So in this session, it's going to be like a 1-hour casual session. My purpose for these sessions is to kind of go through some example homeworks that have been posted in the community group, kind of give a feedback on what I'm seeing, like further tips. I did get some questions from you guys about some word requests. Writing out certain words with variations for the lowercase letters. And then let's see. So if there's any other question that have not been addressed in the session and you guys want to ask it in the chat box, you're more than welcome to do that. So I'll be checking the chat box periodically throughout the session and be able to respond via text, via the chat as well. Okay, so we are going to get right into it. I'm going to flip my camera. So I'm going to move through module, not the homework number 1, because homework number 1 was just about your baseline of where you started. So we're going to go through feedback for the warm-up drills, the nib exercises, the basic strokes, the lowercase letters. And then I'm going to go over some of the questions that I got from you guys regarding things you wanted to see demoed. So I'm going to flip my camera. And then, okay, let me just go over here. Okay, so I'm going to start with the warm-up drill. So I have a couple of homeworks here printed out. So the purpose of these warm-up drills is always to relax our hand. It's really hard to get right into writing when you sit down. And so warm-up drills are very helpful for me personally to just kind of like prepare my mind and my hand to get into the mode of calligraphy. But all of the things that we're doing for all the ovals, the push and pulls, and the figure 8, they all have a purpose. So I just kind of want to remind you guys why we do what we do. And so these direct ovals, so basically, in the beginning, there has to be a lot of training in our minds as well as our hands. And so oftentimes I want to make an oval shape, but like it takes some time, even though in my mind I want to make the oval shape, it takes some time for my hand to really build enough muscle memory to make that shape. And so the reason why we do these exercises is because as I'm doing these ovals, I really want to look at it. I'm looking at the shape here. I'm also working on my hand muscles, and I'm actually building up that consistency throughout. So I don't want you guys to rush through this to just get it done. As you're doing each of the homeworks, I do want you guys to be intentional about, kind of like remembering why we're doing it. And so as you're doing these ovals, I put this first example here to kind of be a visual guide. So even as you're going through the page, that you can really revert back to the shape. And so the reason why this is important is because I really want the shape of the oval to be bisected by the 55-degree slant line. And the reason why that's important is because, as you know already, all of that copperplate letters is based on that 55-degree slant. And an oval, a shape itself, is a very important shape for us to really cement into our memory. And so you want to have that nice narrowness of the oval with the height should be about double the width. And then for me, I'm always looking at the shape of your ovals. I'm looking kind of, even if it's pencil drills, I can kind of gauge where you've been making that pencil drill. So some of these ovals where, they're on scent and you're doing a great job of repetitive ovals, but then some of the ovals started veering off the slant. And so that's where you really want to be mindful of, like, as you're doing these ovals, to make sure you're staying consistent on the ovals. Make sure even your ovals are not collapsing. It shouldn't be like really narrow like this. You do want to keep this kind of a shape throughout as you're moving across the paper. And we did talk about sweet spot. And I forget who was the one that commented in the community group, but somebody was sharing about how, she realized that if her hand and if she's writing outside of her sweet spot, she notices a difference. And that's exactly why we do talk about making sure that you're writing in that sweet spot so that you're not stretching out your body or leaning forward or kind of feeling tense when you're moving your hand towards your body. So what you want to do is, with your non-writing hand, you want to continually move the paper along. So even as you're doing this, I can't go from the left to the right without feeling like it's going so close to my body. And then all of a sudden my shoulders tense up and my hand tenses up. So as you're doing this and you're doing it very slow and you're kind of looking at the shape as you're doing it, you want to then slowly you can stop. And then you can slowly adjust your paper to make sure that it's always going to be remaining in your sweet spot. So that's kind of what I am looking for these drills. So take your time. You want to have uniformity in your shapes throughout the beginning and the middle and the end. Even as you're doing smaller, something to kind of focus on as you're doing these, this would be about like 3 units high. And then by the end, this is a descending ovals. This would be about 1 unit high. So what you should be noticing as you're moving from big to small is that your movement, we talked about in the course video, is that you want to anchor your forearm muscle at the edge of your desk. And so as you're doing this, your wrist should not be, like anchored on your desk, but you should kind of move your wrist as well as your arm and your hand in one motion. So when I'm looking at my hand and I'm not wearing like my sock guard, I should see it like staying in like one position. You don't want to ever arch your wrist like this, so it's going to cause a lot of fatigue. But when you're moving from a big shape to a smaller shape, you should notice like a kind of like a transition of motion, meaning that you're going to move from like your muscular movement, which is like from your forearm muscle. And then by the time you're doing a really, really small oval, you should be doing most of this movement like with your fingers. So a lot of this motion here should be coming from your wrist up, because obviously as you're doing it smaller, 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 the range of motion, you don't need so much of your bigger muscles from your forearm, but you can just use your finger movement. And so with Copperplate, you are going to be using a combined movement of both the muscular movement from your forearm, because you do need that long control for especially the uppercase letters. But when you guys are doing, let's say, like a lowercase a, like this little shape here, this oval here is small enough where when you're making the shade for that A, that you don't have to use a lot of like the muscles. You can just stay within your finger movement here. But the reason why we do that is so that you can kind of I guess like really focus on like trying to pay attention to how your muscle is being shifted from your forearm to your finger. Because that's kind of like an interesting shift, and you should notice it as you're doing it. But at the same time, you don't want to put too much strain at your wrist. And same thing with like the small to the big. As you go from smaller ovals and you're switching gears to now bigger ovals, you should see more of that movement coming from your forearm muscle by the time you get to this part. But again, look at this shape here is very angular, and you notice that it's already veering off your slant. And so that's something to really watch out for all of these oval drills. Push and pull as well. There's a reason why we do this, because a lot of our full pressure strokes, or even letters like F, a lot of those letters, we have to know how to stay on that 55-degree slant. So when we're going down your slant, your eye, we want to make that straight full pressure stroke, like transition from thin to thick. But that line here is something that we really want to kind of build up that consistency in going down that 55-degree slant. So that's why we're doing this push and pull, because as you're going up and as you're going down, you want to keep like working on the straight lines going down that 55-degree slant. So make sure that you're not just rushing through these, because again, like the angle here, you can easily see that it's kind of veering off your slant. And then for the figure eights, this is more of kind of like a shoulder muscle from your shoulder. So, in the video, I believe I talked about how now from here, you're going to lift up your forearm muscle from the edge of your desk, and your movement should be coming from your shoulder, but you're still going to keep your pen steady because you're gliding along the side of your hand, like right here, like right along your pinky, along the side of your hand. That's where you still have some stability, and that's why you're able to still make that like nice oval shapes as you do these figure eights. So they're just different kinds of movements that we're working on throughout this page here. And so that's why it's very important to at least spend like 5-10 minutes before you go into, writing letters. I love like doing this just to kind of warm up. And so here is Virginie's homework. And again, same thing. I'm looking for the same kind of like consistency throughout your ovals here. I want to make sure they are on your slant line. Even looking at your push and pulls, these are done all really well. And then the figure eights, again, just like having the nice narrow shape in your figure eight so they're not so rounded. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers that particular homework. Let's move on to our nib exercises. Okay, so I love the community group because you guys are testing out different nibs. So some of you guys like the Browse 361, and some of you guys were like, oh, I don't really like that one as much. I like more of the Nico G's, or some people have been sharing how they like the Leonard Principle. And so this is such a great time for you guys to explore and try different nibs. I personally ordered like a nib sampler set when I first started, and I had like over 10 different nibs to begin because why not? Like, I want to figure out like what feels comfortable for me, but you are not able to do that unless you try a lot of different kinds of nibs. And so that's why we want to do these nib exercises with those different nibs. So how you do, so you should see a difference between the thickness of your strokes depending on the nib that you use. So for example, if you use a Hunt 101 versus like a Nico G has a little bit more of kind of that firm tip here. So in order for us to open the tines, for some people who are more heavy-handed, it might be easier, but for other people who are more light-handed, it might be a little bit harder to separate that tine apart. And so that's why it's really good to kind of take some time to experiment and see like what feels like right for and comfortable for your unique hands. Okay, so the full pressure stroke, this is such a great exercise for you to practice both working from the top to the bottom, having a very uniform shape from the top and bottom. And I know that we are also working on the square tops and bottoms. It's totally fine to go back here as it's wet and kind of fill in the gaps here so that you can, let me just grab a pen here. So I would even get into the habit of when you're doing this, just to go back to some of these strokes and kind of make sure that you're filling in the gaps here so that it will be uniform from top to bottom. Okay, so did you notice? Let me zoom in a little more here. Okay. Okay, so you notice this shape right here. So even here at the bottom, if you get into a habit of it, then really as you're writing these strokes, it will just come very like second nature. For me, I still go in and after I do my stroke here, let's say I do my full pressure stroke and let's say I let go, then I'll just quickly go in while the ink is wet and I'll just fill in the top and the bottom to make sure that they're very clean. And so that's something that you can just get into a habit of early on. So do the full pressure stroke, lift up your pen, and then as you do that, while the ink is wet, we're just going to go back in and kind of do a quick retouch. So that's kind of what I want you guys to do for these, like all of these shapes up here, make sure they have very clean tops and bottoms. Kind of like, I guess it's more like photoshopping, like live. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for, just very uniform and also a very clean top and a clean bottom. And then for the thin to thick, this is where I really want you guys to work on the transition from your hairline to your shade. And so grab my other pen. Okay, I guess for me, like if there is a distinction between that transitional point, like this line here, sometimes if we're not careful with the transition, it can kind of bulge out in our strokes. We do want to see, it's kind of like drawing like a very big gradual triangle per se. So ideally, we want to have this transition stroke from thin to thick be very gradual so that there is no noticeable transition like point in our stroke. And so, for example, like here, it is going skinny and then it gets pretty thick right here. So that's why I made it a little check mark here. And so that's kind of like what we want to look for. So this is another example of like the transition releasing here. There is a little bit of that bulge here before we went into that hairline stroke, whereas the stroke next to it is definitely more gradual. There is no noticeable place in the stroke where it kind of stands out to me. And so that's where we want to keep practicing it. This is just going to take time to just get used to having the control from the thick to the thin. Okay, but good job staying on the slant. I know it's a lot to think about with the slant line, the pressure, the release, and just even getting used to the nib. And so you guys are doing great. Okay. And then here, actually, these are called running beads, but what I wanted you guys to do here is actually to do the thin to thick to thin, which looks like this. I'll do it right in here. Okay. So starting from your hairline stroke, so do a little scribble. Hairline stroke, gradual pressure and gradual release. Okay, again, hairline stroke, shade, and release. So practicing just moving down to the baseline, um, gradual and release. And I know some of you guys were going from the second ascender line all the way down to your second descender line. That is going to be a little bit harder to control because it's a lot of spaces. You're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 unit spaces long. So for now, focus on the 3 unit spaces from the second ascender line to the baseline. And as you like kind of build up that consistency, you can then go all the way down to your second descender line. Okay, so that's a thin to thick to thin. And then from thick to thin to thick, you want to start off with the high pressure here. So pressure, oops, release and pressure. And then, oh, sorry, I did it longer. Okay, so pressure, release, pressure. Okay, kind of just, and the reason why we do that is to just, again, it's just different ways to practice our pressure and release, because as you guys know from the letters, like that's what we're practicing. We need to be able to control later on when we're doing things like this, right? This pressure and release. When do we release pressure? When do we add pressure? It's all about the shaded script for Copperplate. To have that consistency is going to really set your script apart. Okay. I don't know if you have any questions so far. Okay, so that's for the nib exercises. Oh, and this was another example of where it was, I think Maria was sharing about how it's harder to stay on slant with the longer strokes. And that's very common because, even to have control with 3 spaces is hard enough. But I was telling her how notice that all of these strokes, you're on slant, but then when we go longer, it is like harder to stay on slant. Whereas like, some of these strokes were kind of veering off the slant, but then the third one, this looks good. And so that's where you want to build up to the longer strokes, because some of our Copperplate letters will take the full like length here. So as an example, for letters like J, I think my ink is drying up on my nib. Okay, so for J, you have to do the full length here. And then this is the capital. Okay, so because of letters like this, we do want to get comfortable going from the second ascender line to the second descender line. So you work your way up from the 3 unit space all the way up to the full length. And so that would be fine. Let's see. Salam. Okay. Oh yes, Salam, I got that question in the community group. I'm actually going to address it at the end of our homework feedback first. Let's see, Virginie. I have a question about how to best load your nib with ink. I often get way too much. Sure. So this is my very dirty dinky dip. I sell this in my shop, not this particular one because it was sold out, but this is all I use, and this is what I've been using actually. I've been using these dinky dip, particular it's a screw top plastic vials. And the reason why I like this versus trying to dip my nib from like an actual ink bottle is because the size of this dinky dip is perfect to dip with my nib. And so I usually just like fill one up with like one of my popular inks. So I have here my walnut, my sumi, I have my peach white, and then I have my vermilion ink. And so I just dip it, so you make sure you pass the eye of the nib, which is like the hole, and you dip it here, and then I just scrape off from the back, and then I like flip my pen, and I'll like kind of like get the excess ink off my nib. Okay, let's see. So if you feel like you're getting too much ink on your nib, it might like blob on your paper as you're writing. So you do want to make sure you scrape off the excess. And I just use the edge of my jar to just kind of like, get it off like this. Okay. Sue asking, when we're pulling down, is our elbow supposed to come towards my body or just forearm is moving? I don't. So, when we are anchoring our forearm muscle to the edge of the desk, it never like comes up. So there's no reason for our elbow to move much. So actually if you guys just like do it right now with me, if you're putting your forearm muscle at the edge of your desk and you're just kind of rocking your arm back and forth, you should have at least like 2 to 3 inches to move your pen and your hand. And so let's see if I can show you guys this. Okay, so here's the edge of my desk. I'm going to take off my socks so you can see. Hopefully I can show you. I don't know how to best anchor my, oh, okay. Okay. So this is the edge of my desk here, and then this is my forearm muscle. So when I'm writing, like I'm just rocking it like this. So like, yes, the elbow kind of moves, but it's not going all the way out like this. My position for my forearm muscle should never be like moving like towards my body as I'm writing, across my paper. It's always going to be anchored here, but you have like a give or take like 2 to 3, like right, about 2 inches, I would say. And you guys can do this with me. And so make sure that you're anchored. That's what I mean by anchoring. You never want to move like this muscle from the edge of your desk. And then as you're writing, like I'm just kind of rocking it. You'll notice that when you're doing oval drills, you'll do like this rocking motion in an oval. And then when we're doing up and down, it should go like this. That's pretty much the extent of where my elbow, it will never like touch my body because it's just limited in the range of motion. The only time our elbow is going to come directly towards my body is when I'm doing like the whole arm movement with the figure eights that we did before. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Dai is asking, should the eye of the nib always be parallel no matter? Yes. You definitely want to make sure that your position of your nib, and let me just like remind you guys again, it should always be parallel to the slant line. So let me go closer. Okay. So if this is our slant line right here, this is going to be my nib, and I'm going to go really close. Sorry, guys. Okay. Actually, maybe I'll just grab a blank one. I'm going to just grab a blank guide sheet here. Okay, so this is a Copperplate guide sheet, and this is my nib. You want to make sure that when you're looking down at your paper, your nib is going to be parallel, because the reason being is because when we add pressure, the tines are separating, and you want that even pressure going down your slant, because all of our Copperplate letters are going to be on that 55-degree slant. So if you angle your nib like this, and then you're trying to pull it down this way, then one nib will maybe get more, I guess, shaved down than the other. I mean, if there is like unevenness with like the way that we're placing our tines on the paper, it can also affect the nib quality. So yes, you do want this eye of the nib, like right here, that line, to run parallel to the slant line always, no matter what letter you're making. The only time I will adjust my nib, like let's say I'll adjust it like this way, is if I'm working on flourishes. So for example, if you want me to demo that really quickly, let's see. I'm just kind of trying to make something up right now. But if I'm trying to think of a situation where I do adjust, if I'm tweaking the angle of my nib to paper. Okay, so I don't know. I'm just gonna write one letter. Okay, let's say I do D. And I'm gonna do a little more bouncy, let's say. We're still staying consistent. But let's say on the top here, you want to now, sometimes I'll go like this. I'll angle my pen this way because it's easier to make that shade. And then let's say I add a little flourish. The camera's in my way, so my pen's hitting the camera. Okay. Does that make sense? So the only time I will move the angle of my nib is if, because I want a shade here, it's easier for me to do it if I position it that way, because there's no way for me to make a shade over here if my pen is positioned this way. So that's the only time I will kind of move my pen over for flourishes. But when it comes to writing letters, you want to keep that consistency for your nib and the angle. Okay, I think those are all the questions. Okay. Let's move on to the basic strokes. So we covered the nib exercises, the basics, and now we're moving on to the basics. Okay, so here are the exit and entrance strokes. We have these, you guys are doing really well. They're just like no pressure hairline strokes from your baseline to your waistline. The overturn strokes, what I'm looking for here is just, again, that transition. So I'm looking for like the thin to thick, and I want to also emphasize that you want to finish your strokes well. Make sure you're hitting that baseline and kind of cleaning up your edges. And then looking for a nice thin to thick transition from your waistline to your baseline. I like that, like there was like an adjustment from like sometimes when you're connecting these drills, it is tempting to make this part kind of flat, but you want to envision the embedded ovals, which is why I highly recommend practicing these with your guide sheets. So let me share which ones I would use. You can even use this one. This one. Okay, this is the guide sheet that you should be using for any of like the connecting drills. It's called the Copperplate Drill Guide Sheet. And so with these, you can do all of your overturn drills, your underturn drills, your compound curve drills. And so I purposely made this and I've positioned the ovals and the slants this way. So you have kind of a guide to practice these strokes. So how you would do this would be, and this kind of helps you to make sure that this part of your stroke doesn't get flat. Okay, so let's move down here. Okay, so you're gonna go from your hairline stroke, come around the oval, and gradually add pressure. Stop at the baseline. Oh, I went a little bit lower. And then you're gonna gently glide up here, keeping a nice oval shape, and then stopping it at the baseline. Okay, so this guide sheet should help you to kind of practice this connecting stroke here to make sure that it's nice and curved instead of making it flat. And also doing this guide sheet and going across your paper here is also going to help you with the spacing between your overturn strokes. So this spacing right here in between. So in order to kind of build up that memory, I highly recommend using this drills guide sheet to do that. And then this also works for your underturn strokes. So underturn strokes going up, lifting up your pen, connecting it, and then going back up. Okay, so kind of using the ovals as a guide to space them out. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the even spacing, I'm looking for the transition and making sure that your downstrokes are running parallel to that slant line. So both for the overturns as well as the underturn, okay? Another thing that you can look for when you're doing these drills is that when you're connecting these underturn strokes together or the overturn strokes, you want to look at the triangle shape here of your connecting points, because if you are overlapping your strokes from one another, this triangle will be really small. But when you compare it to, let's say right here, Ideally we do want to have kind of a big triangle here where the point it goes up as close to the middle of your X height as possible. And that means that you're not overlapping your strokes. And so kind of make sure you're checking for this triangle space and like comparing it to how you're connecting those underturn strokes. Okay, so the compound curve stroke is pretty much like a combination of your overturn and your underturn strokes. These strokes, one thing I did want to mention for this particular stroke that I've seen a lot of students like struggle with is making sure that you're not purposely just clean off my nib. Okay. When you're doing this downstroke right here for the compound curve stroke, you want to make sure that it's going to be on your slant line. So down here and then coming back up, okay? And so instead of, let's say we're doing something like this, going up and then I see this a lot where students will kind of overcompensate to make that curve so that they want to make this like a little bit of like the S curve here as they're making the shape. But when you're doing this compound curve, you actually want to keep this part straight on the slant line. Okay, so going up, staying on the slant line, and then coming back up. There shouldn't be much of a curve for this part right here. From here to here, it should be straight along that slant line. Okay, and so that's kind of like what I'm looking for these compound curve strokes. Okay, let's see if there's another example here. Okay, so this is like one example where I can show you guys. I think this one was Lynn's example. Okay, so I don't have a ruler in front of me right now, but let me see if I can grab any straight edge. Okay. So right here, you notice that it's right on that slant line. So that's why like when you're practicing with the slant line, it helps you to kind of stay on that slant. But notice the one right next to it. This line right here, okay, this stroke right here, when you are putting that line through the stroke, it's actually off slant, okay? Do you guys see like a subtle difference between this one and this one? Okay, this one is like on this main slant is on your slant line here. This one, there was a slight twist to that like shade, which caused like it to be a little more curved, whereas this one is like more straighter versus this one. Even comparing it to this stroke right here, if you compare a straight line through, it goes a little bit more to the right. And that's where you really want to use the slant lines here to practice your compound curve strokes. Okay. Let's move on to, let's see how we're doing time. Okay, we're good with time. We're going to move on to the longer ascending and descending stem loops. So for these, I know this one is a little bit harder to, I think this is Eleanor's actually. It's a little bit harder because I know she used like a translucent paper over like the guide sheet. Okay, so the main thing here is that what I'm looking for is just a shape of these ovals. So I do want to picture a nice oval on the top here. As you're working on these ascending stem loops and descending stem loops, you should notice like it is more of a challenge compared to the shorter basic strokes like the ovals or underturns or overturns, because this is only 1 unit high. All of a sudden we're going now to the 3 unit high strokes. So this one requires a very like steady control of your muscles. And so as you're going from your waistline here, you're coming around with the upstroke, which is already hard to do. And I know like it is challenging to do upstrokes more than the downstrokes. But as you do this, I want you guys to envision this like oval shape. And then as you come down here, you're going to then do that whole exercise we did before for the thin to thick to thin, right? Oh, this one we ended with a thick, right? So you should finish off with a nice squared bottom, and then we're going to connect it. The reason why I like doing this connecting stroke is because it's going to help you to practice how much space do you need to move your nib over so that you're not overlapping this space. Remember we talked about that triangle space here? So as you're doing this, you're actually practicing a lot of different things. You're practicing the oval shape of your ascending stem loop. You're practicing making sure you have enough space for connecting the ascending stem loops to that exit stroke, right? And you're also practicing the transition from the thin to thick. So there is, again, like a lot to think about, but as you're doing these drills, I want you guys to kind of like look for those little markers for when you are making those strokes. So I know some of the strokes are a little bit flatter, some of them were done really beautiful, but mainly we just want to have a nice consistency and kind of envisioning that nice oval shaping tucked in underneath that that loop. So a guide sheet that I do have in your course downloads is the stem loop guide sheet. So this is also something that I highly recommend that you utilize. If you feel like your ascending stem loops and your descending stem loops are getting really narrow and you're not getting that consistency that you want for your ascenders and descenders, please use this one. This is called your Copperplate Stem Loop Guide Sheet. It's in your downloads. And so you want to be able to practice this until you get kind of like a rhythm. Everybody talks about like that writing flow and the rhythm. This is going to actually help you. I created this guide sheet because, you know, my students were having a hard time making that like nice openness in their ascending stem loop. So as you do this, you want to just kind of trace around that shape and then go straight down onto your baseline with the thickest part at the bottom. Oh, this one's a little too skinny. I would probably do something like this, right? And then that should help you to kind of round out the top, also open up your letters, because some of the ascending stem loops, I'm noticing that it's very narrow. And you don't want your ascending stem loops to look very constricted. Let's see. Okay, there was a question about how much of making this loop is considered finger versus arm movement. So when I'm making this ascending stem loop here, I am, again, I'm using my forearm muscle to kind of propel me upward here because I'm just gliding along the side of my hand. And then as I round a curve here, then I'm using my finger, movement to make the shade. Finger movement is what you need to control like the pressure release of your tines, of your nibs. But you do need that muscular movement from your forearm to make that controlled like stroke from like the second ascender space to your baseline. So that's why I'm saying you need both. It's not just one or the other. You don't want just a finger movement for the loop because then you're going to keep your wrist anchored on your paper and it's going to cause a lot of like fatigue. You do want to use your forearm muscle. You're only using your finger movement for when you're adding the shade along with your forearm muscle. Hopefully that makes sense. Does that make sense to you guys? Am I talking too fast? I feel like maybe I'm talking too fast because I want to like get through all of this as quickly as possible. Okay. So you want to go up, use this stem loop guide sheet, come around, gradually add pressure from thin to thick and kind of build up that consistency. And then that should help you with the shapes of these ascenders as well as the descenders. Okay. Let's see, what else was I gonna say? Oh, okay. So this was another example where I just was looking at the homeworks. You also want to look for the connection point. So here, I'm not sure if like she just did a one loop going up like this. I know with modern calligraphy, you can just kind of go up and then loop it down to connect it to the L. But for Copperplate, remember, we want to break apart all of our strokes. So you want to make sure you have your entrance stroke, lift up your pen, start at the waistline here, and then you want to go up and then bring your stroke down. So I should actually see this connection point here come lower. It should be at the waistline. It shouldn't be higher than the waistline. So that makes me wonder if like either we're not starting that point at the correct space or whether this line here is just being continually done. Okay, so make sure it's a little higher than I would like all of these here. You notice? So you want it like this. This is done really well right here, this connection here. Okay, so you want to do your engine stroke, lift up your pen. You want to make it seem like it's like seamless, right? You want to make it look like it's connected. So you should end it at the baseline and begin it at, end it at the waistline and begin it at the waistline for the next stroke. Okay. For the descending stem loop, same thing. I want to see a nice transition from your thick to thin. Make sure that you are finishing this off with that square top, because notice that this part is really thick and then all of a sudden it kind of tapers off at the top. And that's why I like to go back and I like to make that square top and fill in the gap so that you do have a very clean top. So the thickest part should be at the top. And that's, yeah. So that's the kind of like a minor difference here. Here, I'm looking at the transition here. It's a little bit abrupt right here. It kind of goes from thick and then all of a sudden it loses pressure. So having that gradual release of pressure, again, like a straight line here is like what we're looking for. So working on your transitions as well as connecting it from your exit stroke to the thick to thin. And then staying on your slant line, of course. Okay. Let's move on to the last homework review would be for our lowercase letters. And then I'll go over the questions that Salam had too. Okay. So here are the homeworks. This is from Carola. So this is similar to what we were talking about before. This ascending stem loop, we talked about how the letter B, the width of it should be the same, right? From the top and the bottom. So already I'm noticing that the width of this ascending stem loop is a lot smaller than I would like. And so my advice for this would be to go back to the stem loop guide sheet and practice that repetitiveness so that you really see the shape that you want to get. If you kind of envision it in your mind, like this shape is done really beautifully, okay, right? You see how this shape right here is a lot better than this one over here, okay? So until you get like a goal in your mind for the shape that you want to make with your hand, that's where we want to be. So the K and the L loops are done really well. The B was a little narrow. Here, let's see, what else? Oh, you want to watch the downstroke here from your thin to thick for the letter F. The longer strokes, there was a question, I think Trami asked this, is there any tips on how to practice the lines going straight down on your slant line for like letters like F or P? So it is just practice. You just have to continue to build up the consistency through practice. There's just no other shortcuts. So going back to our basic strokes and our nib exercises, this is going to really help you. All of these exercises that we did, the thin to thick, the full pressure stroke will be good for the letter P. This will be good for letter F. And all of those strokes are going to come out in your letters. And so that's why I always emphasize it's so important to master the basics first. So if you feel like you are still in this place of, needing to like refine your basics and even your nib exercises and having a consistency in your slant line, I want you to incorporate a lot of like your practice times also to make sure that you're doing these first without just jumping right into the letters. And I know right now with this course schedule, we're going to move on to uppercase and I'm going to have you guys write out words, and that's fine. But even after the course ends, when you guys go back to how to like practice, you should go back to just the basic strokes, the nib exercises, basic strokes, and then slowly like practice these letters by the groups that we talked about in the class. So yeah, all of this consistency will come from just building like consistent practices. And then here, the reason why I put an arrow there is because it released pressure a little too quickly. You want to make sure that you have at least shading until about here. So I like to transition maybe somewhere between here and here, so thick, and then start transitioning at this point, thick to thin. Okay, so here the whole bottom below the baseline was all hairline strokes. It looked very skinny at the bottom. So you do want to add a little bit of weight here on the top. Everything else was done really well. All of that like on the slant line, that's done really well. I was happy with these. Oh, okay. So this R is a very unique R for Copperplate. I don't know if you guys like this or not, but I actually think that it can be very, pretty. So let me just demo how to do this R because I've seen some a little bit like different ways that you guys are doing it. Okay, so you want to start this R with your overturn stroke. Okay. Okay, gradually add pressure here. Okay, then you want to do a slight curve out to the right like this. Okay, and then you want to add a pressure to the left of that. See, it's going to go left to that hairline stroke and like a little, and this can be actually like a square top, even like a square top and pressure release. And then you can either connect it from here, from right at the bottom of that shade, or sometimes depending on the next letter. So let's say the next letter is a letter E. I like to then just go down a little bit just to give me a little more space to work with. And I'll do like a slight horizontal curved line and then do my E. Oh, my ink is like not flowing. Okay. Okay, so depending on the letter I have next to it, I'll either adjust this exit stroke to a little bit lower, or you can connect it from up here. Okay, but I just wanted to make sure that your shading here is not going to the outside of the hairline like this. It looks like it was done on the outside, but it should actually, this shade here should be parallel to the slant line. Let me see if I have another example of that. Can't find it right now. Okay, so meaning that when I'm looking at the shade, oops. When I'm looking at the shade here, you see how it's going like more like this direction, right? But the shading for the R, it should be along this slant, like a shade release along that slant line, okay? And then lifting that pen up. Okay, let's see. So same thing with the W. This W looks like the shade was done on the right side, right? Here is the hairline stroke, and the shade here is on the right. You want to make sure that this shade is actually in the inside. Okay, the pressure release on the inside, okay, and then you're going to do your exit stroke out to your right. Okay, and then here is a letter Y. My only comment here is the same thing as the letter G. It's a little bit too like skinny at the bottom, okay, compared to like even the letter Z here. So for me, I like to just add a little bit more like shading here. Okay, so first you want to touch up this top part to make sure it's nice and thick at the top. Okay, and then we're going to maybe start releasing, add a little more pressure here. And then you can transition like to that hairline. You notice the difference a little bit, right? Okay, so that's kind of like usually how I do my Ys. Okay, releasing pressure maybe about this point here, gradual release. Okay, let's see, anything else I wanted to touch upon with you guys? This is another homework here. Okay. Another thing I want you guys to look at when you're working on your lowercase letter is the width of your oval shape. So notice that the letter A here and the area of the letter inside of that B. So this A and then your G's, like this oval shape is pretty consistent, right? For both A and G, but the B here looks very skinny. Okay, so if I'm drawing my oval here and I'm making that same oval here, you want your B to be kind of like hugging that oval shape. So make sure that the shape of your B's are similar to the shape of the ovals inside of your A's and D's and G's, because those have a very clear oval shape. So that should give you like the spacing of your counter, like space right here. Like this one was done really well because the C here is consistent with the D, but I just noticed that the B was a little bit more skinnier. Okay, For the H's, the compound curves, on this one, you want to make sure that your spacing for the compound curve has that oval shape too, like right here and here. Okay, so it's a little bit tight here. Okay, so make sure you're kind of spacing that apart, because if we compare this letter H to the G, the letter H looks a lot more kind of like squished compared to the letter G. Okay. And I think that goes for all of these compound curves with the M's and N's. And for the best way to practice for letters like this is you can even use the oval embedded guide sheet. I would probably use this one. I know I have so many guide sheets that's included in the course download. So this one, okay. So here's an example that I use with the R and R. I think Trami asked me, how do you write the word Mary? So for the letter M, if you have a hard time getting that first stroke right, because usually if you get the first overturn stroke like to the width that you like, then the next two will be easier to do because you already have kind of like the guide marker for what you want for the spacing for the oval here. So this particular guide sheet can be helpful for that. You can just use this guide sheet to kind of do your first overturn stroke, right? And then for that, after you do that one, then you can kind of use it for your next one. It'll give you like a place to start. Same thing with your H's and your P's. Using this oval to practice those letters will help you to like widen the width of your oval shape inside of those letters, okay? But this is how I would connect the R and the R. If I were to use like a variation of the letter R's within a word, like will you marry me? Then this is how I would do it. Okay, you just do, this is your standard R, and this would be like that overturn R that we talked about before. Okay, and then for the Y, for the basic Y, we talked about this start and then like it goes down like this, right? But then depending on the connection here, like this was going upwards like this, instead of me going up and then back around again for this part here, I basically just started the Y with an underturn stroke. So those are kind of interchangeable. You can decide to not start the Y. Both are acceptable forms of copperplate letters. But depending on the connections, sometimes I will choose to make it cleaner by just going right into the underturn stroke for the Y. Okay. Let me know if you have any questions as I go through the last bit of homework here. I think I only have one more homework printed out here. And this one was Katerina, I believe. Okay, so again, beautiful work. I'm going to just zoom out here so you guys can see. Okay. Okay, again, like this one, I'm just looking for overall, I'm looking for the consistency in your slant. So this one was a slightly off-centered. I'm looking for like how your compound curves are coming along. Remember we talked about how there's a tendency to flatten out that connection point, but I love how she adjusted it. And this one looks so much better than this one, right? I'm looking for the nice transition from thick to thin, making sure that you're finishing off your stroke really strong, okay? Make sure you close out your strokes very intentionally. So having the thickest part at the bottom with the squared bottom, this is done really well. This one, again, I noticed is more angular. You see how this is more like a very sharp turn here, but I loved how she adjusted it and made it more rounded like the ovals. And then the other thing would be just the letter R here. We talked about just making sure that this is not curved in too much to the left. Let's see what else. Okay. Oh, and then one other comment for this particular homework would be when you're doing your letter Ys, you want to make sure that the width of your shade for your compound curve is similar to the thickness of your main shade. Okay, so sometimes like, let's see if I can demo this. Just to compare, let's go over here. Okay, So the thickness of your shade depends on each person. Some people might be more heavy-handed than others, but generally speaking, you do want to do, this is coated a little bit. Okay. Maybe I'll use my Sumi ink. I'm just wiping it out here because I think there was a request to write with a Sumi ink too. Do you guys, what ink have you guys been using? Have you guys been using the Sumi or the walnut? I know I've been using the walnut for the course because the Sumi can also, like, it can get like the ink flow can be effective if I write for a long time. But I do use both Sumi and walnut ink. Okay, so if you do Y here, okay, this one's skinnier than I want to. Let's do it again. Okay, so okay, you want the width of your compound curve stroke to be the same as your downstroke. Okay, so meaning that if I do, let's say, I'm kind of exaggerating here, but if we're doing the stroke here with like barely any shade and then this next stroke to be thicker, you don't want a difference for that. So when I'm looking at this thickness for the stroke right here, I just also want to make sure that this compound curve stroke is going to have the same thickness generally so that it will look like cohesive. So probably something like that would be a little better. Okay, let's see. I'm going to move on to HP, yes, HP Premium is what I usually use. HP Premium 32 laser. I usually order it in bulk through Amazon, and then that's what I use to print out all of my practice guide sheets. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the last bit of questions that I had received. So there was a question about writing the word. I showed you guys Mary. Affectionate. I can do that request. Let me just grab my guide sheet. Paper here. Let me see. Okay. So I'm going to write with a Sumi ink because there was, if you feel like your upstrokes for your Sumi ink are not like thin, so this is Sumi ink, right? Did I write this? No, I wrote this with a walnut ink. But the Sumi ink should give a similar kind of, it should be a little bit thicker than the walnut, but it shouldn't be noticeably different. And so that also depends on the kind of paper that you're using. I think on like wax paper, translucent paper, sometimes like the Sumi or walnut can look a little different on those, or sometimes with like different kinds of cotton paper, it can also look different. But I like using the walnut just because it's like easy to clean and it's just gives like such nice fine lines, hairlines. Okay, so let's do affectionate. So if I were to do to 8. I'm just going to go below the baseline. And then F, we're going to do flick mark. We can do, let's say we'll do a bigger F here. Control it on that slant line. affectionate. So I'm using a titanium zebra G, which is very similar to the Nico G. It has like a similar like firm tip. It's pretty easy to control and it's good for beginners or even just any level actually. Okay. Affectionate. So dot my eyes. And then here with the F, so this is where she was asking to do like a different F next to each other. So that's what I would do. So this one, you can add a comma dot here at the bottom for that F, but I wouldn't cross it here because, you know, our ascending stem loop is right here at the waistline. So you can just do like a crossbar for this F. Okay. And then make sure to finish your C's here with your dot. Okay. And then with this T, you can just do a straight line across, or you can do a curved line. This is more of like a flourish, something like that. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of different like Sumi inks out there, like a black ink. So you know, I think Katerina was sharing how she's using the Higgins. I've been using Moon Palace for a very long time. Like that was like the one that was recommended to me by my teacher like 10 years ago. So I'm just a creature of habit. So I feel like unless it's like a reason for me to switch, I don't veer too much away from what I'm just like used to. But I think I have tried Higgins before. I just feel like this is my go-to for my Sumi. But if you guys like other Sumi inks, that's totally fine. Like find what ink like works for you and what feels good for your writing. Okay, let's see. A variation for the T. Sorry, can you Katerina, can you just clarify what you mean by that? Okay, but then another question I got from Salam was, is there a transition from using guidelines to not using them? So the question was, should I just stop using them altogether, especially for live events? So I haven't done so much live events, but I'm assuming that for live events, time is of essence, and you have to be able to kind of like punch out like because you're kind of there for a select amount of time, right? You don't really have time to perfect every single thing that you're writing. And so my suggestion would be for live events that I've been to, I've only taken my like guide sheet, or not even this guide sheet because it kind of looks weird to take a practice sheet to like a live event. But hold on one second. Okay, so this is something that I've used before in like a live event setting where I would just bring my envelope guide sheet. Like this is my envelope guide sheet. You can download it on my shop for free. I don't think I charge for this. Yeah. And then it just kind of has my baseline. It has like lines for my X height, and then it has like a center line. So I just kind of gauge approximately like what I would need. I'm trying to see if I have some scrap paper to show you my setup. Let's say, for example, here's like a handmade paper. Okay. So if I were to set this up at a live event, I would just make sure like, you know, so it helps to have a lot of lines because then I can set up the bottom of the page to align here. And then I would use this, which is my Black & Decker laser level. This is like $15 or something on Amazon. And then you can, if you turn it on, it's kind of hard to see in this lighting, but at least I can use this light here to show me where my baseline is, and visually I can kind of guesstimate like how big of like an X height I would want to write my letters. So this particular X height is at 5 millimeter, and so it's a pretty like average size for like copperplate letters. I don't know, depending on what you're writing on, you might have to make your letters bigger or smaller. But at least for me, I need a baseline. I can't just wing like writing straight when I'm at a live event. And so I just like to bring at least my laser level, my some sort of like a guide sheet where I can have a baseline and have like different lines set up for me. And that's kind of like my setup for the live event. Okay. Oh, okay. So you wanted a word with a double T. Great. I can do that. Do you have a particular word in mind for a double T? Oh, I don't want to keep you guys too long. It's 1:40, so this will be my last demo. Let me know, Katerina, if you have a specific word with a double T. Okay. Oopsie. And then I will, and if you have other questions, let me know here. So at least I know what you guys are asking about, or if you need clarifications on anything. But I hope that this session has been helpful to just kind of go through the different homeworks. And actually, I did want to share with you one last thing before we do end this session. But first, let me write this name. Okay. So, oh, sorry. So going back to Salam, sorry, I'm like all over the place right now. So going back to Salam's question about whether we should use the guidelines or not. I think once you build up that muscle memory after writing on these guide sheets, for now, like when I'm writing like place cards for my students or when I'm at a live event, I don't like have to use every single guidelines. Eventually, it's kind of like when you're learning to ride a bike. You do write with like training wheels at first, but then eventually, like my 13-year-old doesn't need training wheels anymore, but my 5-year-old son needs it right now. So, you know, eventually you don't want to be so tied to this guide sheet. We use it a lot for muscle memory. We use it a lot for training right now, but eventually you should be able to come to a point where you don't need guidelines. You just need a baseline just to write in a straight line, and you should be able to have a consistency in your slant line. So hopefully that like answers that question. Because, you know, for me, like my 5-year-old is still very like unstable. He doesn't have like the confidence or the muscle memory to, you know, be able to ride a bike on his own. So he needs training wheels. But later on, like, you know, like with my 10-year-old and my 13-year-old, like they're just off, like, you know, riding their bike so fast and they don't need training wheels. And so that's kind of like our hope too as calligraphers. Like we want to start with these, but then eventually, yeah, I don't really use this all the time. But I do use it for when I'm writing like longer pieces. When I'm working on a very design heavy piece, I do use guide sheets to kind of sketch out my commission, and then I will kind of transfer it onto a final paper just because it looks more like just to have that like as my guideline for when I'm working on like a very expensive commission versus like when I'm doing like envelopes for a friend or like place cards. Okay. Let me go with the Matino and then we will close it off. Okay. So here, so M, oh, you guys didn't learn capital letters yet. So, but let me just do this. M, A, T, I think it's T-T-I-N-O. Okay, great. I, and then O. Okay, and you can go back and kind of add those square tops here. Okay. And then, so for me, if you want to do a cross by here, you can just do one straight line across. Okay. Or like for me, I really do like flourishing. So I would probably cross it just to show you guys something different. I would probably cross it something like this. And actually this, I crossed over that I. So actually I wouldn't dot my I until I did this flourish. You can do a flick mark here to cross that, crossbar for the T, or you can adjust the little dot by moving it lower, a little lower. I think that's what I would do. Okay. Let's see. Virginia was asking, okay, so if I have time to review each of your homework, so we know. So I don't offer like personalized feedback, because that would definitely take a lot of like time. It would be more of like a premium experience for the class. If you guys do want like one-on-one feedback and you want me to look at each and every homework that you submit, it would be like an additional cost. So you can feel free to email me regarding that. But my purpose for these live sessions is to cover enough feedback so that you will be empowered to know how to critique your own work. So everything that I talked about today in regards to, like as you're moving through the homework, like what you're looking for, what to watch out for, some of the common like issues that I'm seeing, they are actually similar across the board. I've been teaching Copperplate since like 2015. No, 2015 was my first in-person workshop. And so the common things that I see across the board for a lot of these homeworks are pretty same. And so my hope is that through like our session today, as I'm going over like sharing with you guys what I'm looking for, that you'll be able to go back to your homework and be able to kind of assess your own work. Because I do want you guys to have a trained eye. I don't want you guys to be dependent on someone else to be able to look at your work. But as I share my feedback, that you'll be able to go back to your homework and then see, am I staying on the slant? How is my transitions? How is the shape of my descending and my ascending stem loops? So those are the questions that I want you guys to start thinking about so that you will know not to just, do your homework and your practices kind of like just, without any like, intention or purpose. And so hopefully these sessions are informative enough to kind of like empower you to know how to critique your work. Okay, let me. Okay, back. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me today. I know I went a little over. I can't believe it's already 1:45, but hopefully this has been helpful for you guys. This is going to be my like format for even the next live session. So module 5, connecting letters, uppercase letters, as well as looking at how you guys are connecting your uppercase to your lowercase letter is what we're going to be talking about in our next live session. And so the more you guys submit to me, the more like time I have to look over your homework and be able to see what are some things that you guys are struggling with and what are some things that I need to really help you guys, just to remind you guys to do. I did forget to, I already turned my camera, but I was going to say Fabian was sharing in the community group how her like beginning, oh, like this way. Okay. How her beginning of like the course and like even like right now, she's seeing so much improvement. I don't know if you guys can see this. So this is her now, current state, and this was her before. Like, do you see how angular it was and how much already like you see the nice oval shapes in her copperplate letters? And so that really excites me because I even have Salam's homework here. Okay, so that really excites me because it shows me that with practice, with consistency, like this is her before here, this is her before, and this is her after. And you can already tell that even like the shading is different. It's a lot lighter up here compared to her before. And obviously all of like her ascending stem loops are in the right proportion now. Even like the letter P's, I'm noticing all these little details, but that makes like a big difference like in your script. So this makes me really happy to see. I hope that, I have students here returning after like, enrolling in the class like 3 years ago, and then they come back. And so you guys are more than welcome to join us again in future rounds. I plan on opening this class maybe early 2025. And so usually I open it twice a year. And so if you guys are free and you want that extra accountability and to joining these live sessions, like you can do that too. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys go. Thank you so much again for joining. I hope to connect with you guys more in the community group, and I hope to see more of your work there. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.